Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was the reincarnation of Hercules in the modern world? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The dream always began with the sun. It was not the gentle, filtered sun of modern Japan, but a savage, blinding star beating down on a land of baked earth and shimmering rock. Dust, fine as powdered bone, coated a tongue he didn't recognize as his own. A roar echoed, not from a throat, but from the very bedrock of the world, a sound of primal fury that vibrated through the sandals on his feet and up into his bones. In the dream, he was not Izuku Midoriya. He was larger, broader. His skin was bronze from a lifetime spent under that relentless sun. A simple, sky-blue tunic, now stained with grime and something darker, was his only armor. His hands, calloused and scarred, felt as if they could crumble stone. They felt like his hands, and before him stood the beast. It was a lion, but to call it a lion was like calling a typhoon a summer shower. It was a creature of myth, impossibly large, its muscles rolling like boulders under a pelt of shimmering gold. Its eyes were molten fury, and when it opened its maw to roar again, its teeth were like a row of daggers. It lunged. There was no fear. Fear was a luxury this body, this soul, did not possess in this moment. There was only purpose. He met the charge, not with a weapon, but with his body. The impact was titanic, a clash of two immovable forces. The lion's claws, which could shred steel, skittered uselessly off his skin. Its hide, the dream he knew, was impenetrable. No blade could pierce it, so he did not use a blade. He used his hands. His arms, corded with a strength that defied nature, wrapped around the beast's colossal neck. The lion thrashed, a maelstrom of golden fur and deadly claws, but his grip was absolute. He squeezed, muscle strained against muscle. Sinew screamed. The world narrowed to the pressure in his hands, the burning in his shoulders, the desperate, heaving lungs of the monster trapped in his embrace. A final, guttural crack echoed in the suffocating silence of the dream arena. The beast went limp. Izuku Midoriya awoke with a gasp, his own thin pajama shirt soaked in sweat. The All Might posters on his wall seemed to mock him with their bright, confident smiles. His room was cool, the hum of his computer the only sound, a stark contrast to the dream's oppressive heat. But the feeling remained. His hands, slender and freckled, ached with a deep, phantom burn. His forearms felt like they were on fire, the memory of an impossible exertion etched into his very nerves. He flexed his fingers, half expecting to see calluses and scars. Instead, he saw only the pale, unblemished skin of a 14-year-old boy. A boy who, by every medical definition, possessed a quirk. He called it might. The doctors had called it a high-level strength enhancement. His mother called it a little problem. Izuku called it a curse. Izuku, honey, are you awake? Be careful getting out of bed. His mother's voice, perpetually laced with a soft tremor of anxiety, drifted from the kitchen. I'm okay, Mom, he called back, swinging his legs over the side of the bed with the deliberate, measured care of a bomb disposal expert. He had learned long ago that sudden movements were his enemy. At age 5, a particularly exciting All Might cartoon had caused him to leap out of bed, a simple act that resulted in his feet going straight through the floorboards. At age 7, a sneeze had blown his bedroom door off its hinges. His apartment was a testament to his curse. The doorframe to his room was lined with a thin plate of steel, installed after he'd accidentally shattered the wooden one by bumping it with his shoulder. The cutlery in the kitchen was thick and utilitarian, bought from a restaurant supply store after he'd crushed 3 sets of normal spoons just trying to eat cereal. He drank his morning orange juice from a heavy, reinforced glass mug that looked more like a stein. Every aspect of his life was a negotiation with the overwhelming, clumsy power that resided in his bones. He dressed for school, his movements slow and precise. As he pulled on his black Kakurin uniform, he felt it again, the constant, thrumming energy under his skin. It felt like a high-voltage power line, a sleeping giant in his blood. It wasn't the explosive, manageable power he saw in heroes on TV. It was a dense, heavy, ancient thing. A weight. At the breakfast table, his mother Inko placed a bowl of rice before him, her smile a little too tight. Now, remember what we talked about, Izuku. No rushing. Watch where you're walking. And please try not to break your pencil today. They're getting expensive. I'll be careful, he mumbled, his gaze fixed on his notebook, which lay beside his bowl. It was one of many, but unlike his others from years past filled with fawning praise for heroes, this one was different. Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13, Mitigation and Control. The pages weren't filled with drawings of All Might's Texas Smash. Instead, they were crammed with complex diagrams, physics equations, and meticulous notes. He studied heroes known for their finesse. There were pages dedicated to Snipe, analyzing how he compensated for recoil and managed the force of his shots. There were theories on how Eraserhead used his capture weapon with such fluid grace, a tool that required precision over power. He even had a section on Midnight speculating on how she controlled the dispersal area of her somnambulist quirk to the square centimeter. He was a hero fan but trying desperately to learn how not to use his power. He wanted to save people, more than anything. But how could you save someone when a pat on the back could shatter their spine? How could you be a hero when you were a walking, talking natural disaster? The walk to Aldera Junior High was an exercise in hyper-awareness. He counted his steps. He kept a wide berth from other pedestrians. He could feel the vibrations of the subway passing underground through the soles of his shoes, a sensation he suspected no one else felt. The world was a fragile, glass-blown thing, and he was a bull in a shop the size of a planet. The whispers followed him, as they always did. There goes Midoriya. Don't get too close. Did you hear he cracked a wall in the gym last week just by leaning against it? He wasn't quirkless Deku, the useless nobody. In this life, he was Monster Deku, the dangerous freak. He wasn't sure which was worse. The classroom was a minefield. He navigated the narrow aisles with painstaking slowness, his backpack held tightly to his chest. He sat down at his desk, and with immense concentration, pulled out his mechanical pencil. He hated them, so fragile, but they were a good training tool. If he could get through a day of notes without snapping the graphite or crushing the plastic casing, it was a victory. Well, look what the stray dog dragged in. The voice was as familiar and unwelcome as the ache in his hands. Katsuki Bakugo swaggered to his desk, his usual two cronies in tow. He didn't loom over Izuku menacingly. He stood back, a look of profound disgust on his face, as if Izuku were something slimy he'd found on his shoe. Try not to breathe too hard, monster, Bakugo sneered, a series of tiny, perfectly controlled explosions popping in his open palm like firecrackers. Wouldn't want you to bring the whole building down on us. Izuku shrank in his seat, his eyes fixed on the pops of light in Bakugo's hand. That was true power. Controlled. Precise. Bakugo could use it to propel himself, to create pinpoint explosions, to fight with skill and flair. His own quirk felt like a clumsy, idiotic cudgel by comparison. Leave him alone, Kaken, Izuku mumbled, his grip on his pencil tightening dangerously. He heard a faint creak from the plastic. Bakugo laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Or what? You gonna punch me? Go on, I dare you. Punch me and send me into the next prefecture. That's all you're good for, isn't it? Mindless destruction. He leaned forward, his red eyes narrowed. My quirk is a tool. It's a scalpel. Yours, he gestured dismissively at Izuku's entire being, is a sledgehammer you keep hitting yourself in the face with. All that muscle and not a single brain cell to guide it. You're not a hero candidate. You're a liability. The plastic of the pencil in Izuku's hand finally gave way with a sharp crack. It splintered into a dozen pieces, a few shards digging into his palm. He flinched, more from the shame than the pain. Bakugo just smirked, his point proven. He turned and walked away, leaving Izuku to carefully pick the plastic fragments out of his skin. The teacher walked in then, droning on about high school applications, and Izuku spent the rest of the day trying to take notes, with the broken stub of a pencil, his heart a cold, heavy lump in his chest. Bakugo was right. What hero agency would want a powerhouse who couldn't be trusted not to demolish their own headquarters? The rest of the day passed in a miserable blur. The final bell rang, and Izuku packed his bag, eager to escape. He took a longer, more secluded route home, a winding path under an overpass. He needed to be alone with the thrumming curse in his veins. He replayed Bakugo's words in his head. Mindless. Liability. Monster. He stopped, leaning his forehead against the cool concrete of the underpass wall. He closed his eyes. Another flash of the dream assaulted him. A many-headed serpent, its venomous jaws snapping, its regenerative flesh a nightmare to overcome. He remembered the feeling of cauterizing the wounds with a flaming torch, a desperate, bloody battle of wits and strength. Where did these images come from? They felt more real than his own memories sometimes, violent echoes of a life he'd never lived. A sudden, gurgling roar snapped him back to reality. The manhole cover a few feet in front of him rattled and flew into the air. A foul-smelling, semi-liquid monstrosity erupted from the sewer, a wave of green-brown sludge with two massive, manic eyes and a mouth full of stolen teeth. A medium-sized invisibility cloak, the sludge villain gurgled, its eyes fixing on Izuku. You'll do perfectly. Izuku froze, not from fear, but from a paralyzing calculation. Fight back? A single punch, even a panicked one, would liquefy the villain but also shatter the concrete support pillar of the overpass. The entire structure could collapse. Cars would fall. People would die. Run? He could easily. He was faster than anyone he knew, but the villain would just find someone else, someone who couldn't fight back at all. His hesitation was his undoing. The villain lunged, a tsunami of filth, and enveloped him. It was suffocating. Sludge forced its way into his mouth, his nose. He couldn't breathe. His immense strength was useless, like trying to punch water. The villain was trying to possess his body, to take control of the power he himself couldn't manage. The irony was so bitter it was almost funny. This is it, he thought, his vision starting to blur at the edges. I'm going to die because I was too scared of my own quirk. Then, he heard a familiar voice. Fear not, kid! I am here. The manhole cover clattered again as All Might, in all his Golden Age glory, emerged from the sewer. With a deafening cry of Texas smash, he threw a punch that didn't even connect with the villain. The sheer air pressure it generated was enough to blast the sludge creature apart, splattering it across the tunnel walls. Izuku collapsed to the ground, gasping the clean, sweet air a bomb to his burning lungs. All Might was already scooping the villain's remains into a soda bottle. He was a whirlwind of efficiency and charisma. He was everything Izuku wanted to be. The hero gave Izuku a booming laugh and a signature on his notebook. After a brief, starstruck exchange, All Might prepared to leap away. But the bottle slipped from his pocket. Izuku saw it fall, saw the cap pop open, but he was too dazed to shout a warning in time. All Might was gone, and the sludge villain was free once more. Panic seized him. All Might was gone. The villain was loose in a crowded city. It was his fault. He ran, following the distant sounds of explosions and screams, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He arrived at a familiar shopping district to a scene of chaos. The sludge villain had found a new host. A new hostage. A boy with spiky ash-blonde hair, caught in the suffocating morass, setting off explosions in a desperate, futile attempt to free himself. It was Bakugo. The pro-heroes were there, Death Arms, Kamui Woods, the rookie Empty Lady, but they were helpless. The fire from Bakugo's explosions kept them back. The tight alleyway gave Empty Lady no room to maneuver. Death Arms couldn't get a solid grip. Kamui Woods was useless against a liquid enemy in a fiery environment. They could only watch as Bakugo slowly suffocated. Izuku's blood ran cold. He saw the desperation in Bakugo's eyes, the fear beneath the rage. For all his talk of control and precision, his quirk was only making things worse. He was going to die. Izuku's hero analysis brain took over, a frantic whisper in the back of his mind. Villain's body is fluid, but the eyes and teeth are solid. A weak point. Bakugo is being suffocated, needs air. The grip is tightest around his torso and mouth. Need to create separation. Need to pull him out. The heroes weren't moving. No one was helping. And then, Izuku's legs were moving. He didn't know why. It was a stupid, reckless, quirkless act. He had no plan. He was just a boy in a school uniform running toward a monster. The heroes shouted at him to stop. He ignored them. All he could see was Bakugo's face, the image of a childhood friend, a bully, a rival, but a person, dying in front of him. The terror was a roaring inferno in his chest, but as he closed the distance, something shifted. It was the same feeling from the dream, the same sensation he'd felt for a split second when he'd faced the zero-pointer at the UA entrance exam in his daydreams. The world seemed to slow down. The frantic noise of the crowd faded into a dull hum. The fear didn't vanish, but it was forced into a small, quiet corner by something else. Something ancient. A cold, clear-headed calm washed over him. His frantic, clumsy sprint smoothed into a powerful, ground-eating lope. His shoulders, which were always hunched in a subconscious effort to make himself smaller, broadened and settled. His center of gravity lowered. His posture transformed from that of a scared teenager into that of a seasoned warrior closing in on his prey. It was an instinct he didn't know he possessed, a muscle memory from a life that wasn't his. He didn't throw his school bag wildly. He whipped it with perfect, calculated aim, striking the villain directly in its right eye. The creature flinched, its grip momentarily loosening. It was the opening he needed. He didn't try to punch the sludge. He didn't try to use his terrifying, uncontrollable strength to obliterate it. The warrior soul inside him knew that was the wrong move. Instead, he plunged his hands into the viscous body, ignoring the disgusting, suffocating feeling. He was aiming for Bakugo's arm. His fingers closed around Bakugo's bicep. And in that moment, for the first time in his life, Izuku Midoriya did not hold back. But it wasn't a punch. It was a grip. The power that thrummed in his veins, the weight of a legend he didn't know he carried, focused into his hands. His fingers became like bands of forged steel. He locked on, and he pulled. The sludge villain shrieked, a sound of surprise and pain. It tried to pull back, to absorb Bakugo deeper into its form, but it was useless. The boy's grip was absolute. It felt as if its very substance was being torn apart by the sheer, immovable force latched onto its hostage. It was a power that didn't just push, it commanded. Bakugo's eyes widened, first in shock, then in utter disbelief. He felt the grip on his arm. It wasn't the clumsy, accidental force he'd always mocked. It was focused, intentional, and so impossibly strong it felt like the planet itself had decided to hold him in place. He could feel the individual pressure of each of Izuku's fingers, a terrifying promise of annihilation held in perfect check. In the crowd, a gaunt, skeletal man coughed, his blue eyes wide with shock. All Might, in his weakened form, had been about to step in, but he stopped, mesmerized. He had seen countless strength quirks in his time. He was a strength quirk. But this was different. He saw the boy's transformation, the shift from panicked child to something else entirely. He saw the raw, untamed power that dwarfed almost anything he had ever witnessed, but he also saw the impossible control in that single, desperate grip. It was a paradox. A power that could level a city block was being used with the focused intent of a key turning a lock. It felt old, ancient, divine. The moment, however brief, was all Might needed. Spurred on by the boy's incredible, suicidal courage, the hero's body bulked up. "I really am pathetic," he roared, appearing in a flash. Detroit smash! The resulting hurricane tore the villain to shreds and changed the weather. In the aftermath, chaos reigned. The heroes praised Bakugo for his bravery. They scolded Izuku relentlessly for his recklessness. "You could have gotten yourself killed, kid. There was no reason for you to interfere." Death Arms chided, his face stern. Izuku could only bow his head, mumbling apologies, the ancient warrior spirit having receded, leaving him a trembling, adrenaline-sick teenager once more. Bakugo stormed over to him later, away from the crowds. "I didn't need your help," he screamed, his voice raw. But there was something else in his eyes, something beyond his usual rage. It was a flicker of confusion, of fear. "What the hell was that, Deku? That grip?" He couldn't finish the sentence. He just glared, then turned and stomped away. He had felt that power. It wasn't the monster he knew. It was something else. Dejected, Izuku began the long walk home, the scolding of the heroes echoing in his ears. He was a failure. He had proven Bakugo right. He was a liability. He was. I am here! Izuku yelped as All Might, in his true, skeletal form, skidded to a halt around the corner. After a shocking, sputtering explanation involving a 5-year-old injury and a ticking clock on his hero form, the number 1 hero looked at Izuku, his expression unreadable. Kid, what I saw back there, All Might began, his voice low and serious, all traces of his booming persona gone. I was wrong. The other pros, they were right to scold you for being reckless, but they were wrong about you being useless. Izuku looked up, his eyes wide. I came here to talk to you about your quirk, All Might continued, his gaze intense. I've seen power my whole life. I have fought villains that could tear down skyscrapers. But what I saw in you, for that 1 second, that wasn't just a quirk. It was something else. That raw, untamed force is terrifying, yes. But that grip, the way you channeled it. I have never seen anything like it. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over Izuku. A power like that, young man, doesn't just make a hero. It can make a catastrophe. You stand on a knife's edge between being the greatest savior this world has ever known, or its greatest disaster. Izuku's breath hitched. He was waiting for the final blow, the inevitable you can't be a hero, but it never came. You have the heart of a true hero, All Might said, a flicker of his famous smile returning, though it looked fragile on his thin face. You moved when everyone else was frozen, but your heart isn't enough to control the storm inside you. You need guidance. You need a mentor. He looked at Izuku, a profound seriousness in his eyes. Let me help you learn to control it. Let me help you learn to be the hero you were born to be. Tears streamed down Izuku's face, silent and overwhelming. For the first time, someone wasn't looking at him with fear or disgust. They weren't telling him to hold back, to be careful, to stop. They were looking at the monster inside him, and seeing the potential for a hero. They were offering not a solution, but a path. He nodded, unable to speak, the single gesture carrying the weight of a lifetime of fear and a sudden, terrifying surge of hope. As he walked the rest of the way home, All Might's words echoed in his mind. He looked down at his own 2 hands. The hands that ached with the ghost memory of choking a mythical lion. The hands that had held on to Bakugo with the strength of a god. They felt impossibly heavy, filled with a power he was only just beginning to comprehend. The weight in his bones, the ancient fire in his soul. Maybe it wasn't a curse. Maybe, just maybe, it was a legacy. And his story, the story of Izuku Midoriya, was only just beginning. The next 10 months were a study in contradiction. Izuku Midoriya, a boy with the physical power to move mountains, spent his days moving garbage. All Might's training regimen was not what he had expected. There were no sparring sessions, no lessons on how to throw a superpowered punch. When Izuku had arrived at the designated meeting spot, the garbage-strewn coastline of Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, he had been brimming with nervous energy, his mind racing with possibilities. All Might, in his skeletal form, had simply gestured to the mountains of rusted appliances and soggy trash that choked the sand. Your task, young Midoriya, he had said, his voice quiet but firm, is to clean this entire beach. Every last piece. Izuku had stared, bewildered. But, All Might, I don't need to get stronger. My problem is I'm too strong. Precisely, Tashinori Yagi replied, a glint in his sunken eyes. This is not a test of strength. Any fool can lift a refrigerator. I've seen you do more. This is a test of control. I want you to move that refrigerator. He pointed a bony finger at a rusted, doorless hulk. And place it in that truck over there. You will do it without crushing its frame, without cracking the pavement beneath you, and without disturbing a single grain of sand more than is necessary. This is not weightlifting. This is surgery. And so, his crucible began. The first week was a disaster. He accidentally compressed a washing machine into a cube the size of a microwave. He tried to gently lift a stack of tires and inadvertently sent them sailing into the bay. He cracked the bed of the pickup truck by setting a bundle of scrap metal down with a fraction too much force. Each failure was a fresh wave of despair, a confirmation of Bakugo's taunts. Mindless. A sledgehammer. But All Might was patient. He wasn't a strength coach, he was a mentor, a philosopher of heroism. He taught Izuku to breathe. He had him practice picking up individual glass bottles without breaking them. He made him stack discarded televisions into a tower, a nerve-wracking exercise in delicacy and balance. "Your power feels like a weight, doesn't it, my boy?" Toshinori asked one evening as they sat on a cleared patch of sand, watching the sunset. Izuku nodded, tracing a pattern on the ground. "It feels heavy. And old. Like it doesn't belong to me." "Then you must learn to make it yours," Toshinori said. "Power is not a tool you pick up. It is a part of you. Your fear of it is a wall you have built between your heart and your hands. You have a hero's heart. We just need to teach your hands to listen to it." Slowly, painstakingly, something began to shift. Izuku's notebooks filled with new kinds of analysis. Load distribution, stress points in metal, the physics of leverage. He started to feel the power not as a roaring inferno, but as a deep, powerful river. He couldn't stop the river, but perhaps he could learn to guide its flow. He learned to lift with his legs and back in a way that distributed the force evenly, to grip an object not with crushing strength but with a full, supportive surface area. The beach began to clear. His dreams continued, fragments of a brutal, sun-scorched life. He saw a great, bronze-feathered bird with a razor-sharp beak. He felt the filth of 1,000 stables, a task of impossible scale. He saw a golden apple in a garden at the edge of the world. He never told All Might about them. They were too strange, too intimate. They were a part of the weight he carried alone. By the morning of the UA entrance exam, the beach was pristine. The sun rose over a coastline that sparkled, the sand clean for the first time in years. Izuku stood beside a weary but proud Toshinori, his body lean and defined, not from building muscle, but from mastering it. He still felt the terrifying weight within him, but now, it felt less like a curse and more like a challenge he was finally equipped to face. "Go on, my boy," All Might said, clapping him on the shoulder with surprising strength. "Go and show them not how strong you are, but how heroic you can be." The gates of UA High School were more imposing in person than in any photograph. They were a gateway to his dream, and Izuku felt a tremor of pure, unadulterated terror run through him. Don't trip. Don't lean on the wall. Don't accidentally break the pavement. His mantra of self-control was on a frantic loop in his head. It was, of course, at that moment that he tripped over his own feet. He pitched forward, a gasp escaping his lips, his mind screaming. "Catastrophe! I'm going to hit the ground and cause a crater." The first applicant in history to be disqualified for destroying the entrance, but the impact never came. He stopped, suspended in midair, a strange, light feeling washing over him. "Whoa there! You okay?" a bright, cheerful voice asked. He turned his head to see a girl with a round, kind face and pink cheeks, her fingers pressed together. She was holding him afloat with her quirk. "It's my quirk. Sorry for using it without asking, but it's a bad omen to fall, right? And we both need all the luck we can get." She released him, and he landed gently on his feet. Thank you," he stammered, his face burning. I'm Achiko Uraraka. Well, see you inside. Let's do our best," she said with a wave, before hurrying off toward the auditorium. Izuku stood there for a moment, stunned. She had touched him, used her quirk on him, and hadn't flinched. She hadn't looked at him like he was a piece of unstable dynamite. The thought sent a warmth through his chest that was more potent than any of All Might's encouragement. The written exam was straightforward, but the practical exam briefing in the vast auditorium was a symphony of nervous energy. The pro-hero present Mike explained the rules, a 10-minute mock battle in a massive, simulated cityscape. Examinees would score points by disabling robotic villains of varying difficulty, 1, 2, or 3 points each. Izuku's mind was already at work, not on maximizing points, but on minimizing damage. 1-pointers are probably small and fast. Target leg joints or power cables. 2-pointers larger, focus on severing hydraulic lines. 3-pointers heavily armored. Look for exposed sensors or ventilation ports. His strategy was one of surgical disassembly, not destruction. And finally, Present Mike boomed. "There is the 0-pointer. This is an arena trap. It's worth 0 points, so my advice to you listeners is to run away." The lights came up, and they were herded towards buses that would take them to their designated battle centers. Izuku found himself at Battle Center B. As he stood before the colossal gate, he saw her again, Uraraka, the kind girl from the entrance. She looked just as nervous as he felt. He also saw the stern, blue-haired boy from the auditorium who had admonished him for mumbling. And then, he saw Bakugo, cracking his knuckles at the other end of the crowd, a predatory grin on his face. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Bakugo's expression was one of pure, condescending challenge. "Show me what you've got, you monster." The gate slid open with a deafening groan. "Start!" President Mick's voice blared from unseen speakers. While everyone else hesitated for a moment, confused by the lack of a countdown, Izuku was already moving. 10 months of training with All Might had taught him to react. He bolted into the city, his movements measured and powerful. He rounded the first corner, and came face to face with 2 one-pointers. They were sleek, metallic scorpions, and they lunged at him. The old Izuku would have panicked and smashed them. The new Izuku saw their vulnerabilities. He sidestepped the first, his hand darting out not to punch, but to grab. With a precise, controlled squeeze, he crushed the articulated joint of its tail's stinger. It spasmed and short-circuited. For the second, he didn't even use his hands. A single, perfectly placed kick to its central leg joint shattered the axle, causing it to collapse in a heap, immobilized. 2 points. No crater. No sonic boom. A small, quiet victory. He spent the next several minutes moving through the city like a phantom. Other examinees were a whirlwind of explosions, laser beams, and flashy quirk usage. Izuku was the opposite. He was silent, methodical, and brutally efficient. He found a 3-pointer, a tank-like machine, bearing down on another student. While the other boy threw panicked fireballs at its chassis, Izuku slipped around behind it. He located the primary power conduit, a thick, armored cable running along its spine, and with a grunt of effort, tore it clean out. The machine ground to a halt with a dying whine. The other students barely noticed him. When they did, they saw a plain-looking boy disabling robots with what looked like basic grappling and well-placed strikes. They couldn't see the monumental restraint behind every move, the sheer force of will it took for him not to simply vaporize everything he touched. He was a god trying to fight like a man, and it was exhausting. He had racked up a respectable 45 points, but he knew it was far from the top scores. He was being too careful, too slow. Suddenly, the ground began to shake. A deep, grinding roar echoed between the buildings, and a shadow fell over the entire street. The 0-pointer. It was bigger than he could have possibly imagined, a titan of green metal and black glass that dwarfed the surrounding skyscrapers. Its single red eye glowed with malevolence. Its fists were the size of buses. The other examinees didn't hesitate. They screamed and ran, just as President Mike had advised. It was a rational, logical response. Izuku turned to run, too. There was no point in fighting it. But as he turned, he heard a small, pained cry. Ow! He whipped his head around. Lying on the ground, her leg pinned beneath a large chunk of rubble dislodged by the robot's appearance, was Uraraka. She was trying desperately to push the debris off, but it was too heavy. The 0-pointer was lumbering towards her, its massive foot rising, preparing to take a step that would crush her into paste. Everything stopped. The noise of the panicking crowd, the grinding of the robot's gears, his own frantic thoughts about points and control, it all vanished. All that existed was the girl on the ground and the giant foot descending, the wall between his heart and his hands shattered. The river of power inside him became a raging tsunami. Fear was gone, replaced by a singular, deafening purpose: save her. He didn't run. He launched himself forward, each step a miniature explosion against the asphalt. He covered the 50 meters in the blink of an eye, a green blur of pure intent. He didn't have time to move the rubble. He only had one option. He planted his feet directly in the path of the descending metal foot, a few yards in front of Uraraka. He could feel the ground cracking under the immense pressure of him simply bracing himself. He bent his knees, sinking into a low, impossibly solid stance that felt as natural as breathing, a stance he had never practiced but his soul had known for an eternity. He looked up, his eyes blazing with a light no one had ever seen in them before, and he raised his hands. The robot's fist, not its foot, was what came down, a targeted attack on the small figure who dared to stand in its way. It descended with the force of a meteor strike. The impact was not a fleshy crunch or a desperate block. It was a titanic, deafening clang that echoed through the entire battle center. Izuku's arms, corded with power that defied all logic, met the multi-ton fist and stopped it. The shockwave of the impact blew out every window for 3 city blocks and sent a cloud of dust and debris billowing outwards. For a single, silent moment, the boy held the robot's fist, inches from the ground. His arms shuddered, the muscles screaming, but his bones did not break. His feet were now sunk a foot into the fractured concrete. He was an anchor against an unstoppable force, and in that moment of impossible strain, a memory, clearer than any before, tore through his consciousness. It wasn't a dream. It was a feeling, a sensation of absolute, cosmic weight. He was on his knees, not on concrete, but on grass. And he wasn't holding a robot's fist. He was holding up the sky. The entire, infinite, stardusted weight of the heavens rested on his shoulders, a crushing burden that would annihilate any mortal. But he was not merely mortal. And he did not yield. The sensation was eerily, terrifyingly familiar. The impossible weight of the zero-pointer felt manageable by comparison. A roar tore itself from Izuku's throat. It was not the cry of a boy. It was the bellow of a demigod, a sound of primal exertion and divine fury that seemed to shake the very foundations of the artificial city. He didn't try to push the fist up. He used the robot's own downward momentum. In a single, fluid motion that defied the laws of physics, he shifted his weight, pivoted on his submerged feet, and converted the vertical force into rotational energy. He wasn't just blocking it anymore, he was throwing it. With a final, ground-shaking heave, he hurled the zero-pointer. The colossal machine was lifted from its feet, its arm wrenched back by the boy's impossible leverage. It flew in a clumsy, magnificent arc, tumbling end over the tops of the buildings before crashing down in a distant part of the city with an earth-shattering explosion of twisted metal and smoke. Silence. The entire battle center, once a cacophony of quirks and destruction, was utterly silent. Every single examinee who had been fleeing had stopped dead in their tracks, their faces a mixture of slack-jawed disbelief and primal fear. They had just witnessed a boy, a seemingly quirkless, plain-looking boy, throw a 60-story building. Izuku stood in the center of the crater he'd created, his body trembling violently from the exertion. His arms were bruised and battered, his legs felt like jelly, but he was in one piece. The ancient power receded, leaving him gasping for air, the adrenaline dump hitting him like a physical blow. He staggered over to Uraraka and, with surprising gentleness, lifted the slab of concrete off her leg. "Are you okay?" he wheezed. Uraraka could only stare at him, her eyes wide with awe. She had seen the kindness in his eyes at the gate. Now, she had seen the godlike power in his hands. And she saw no contradiction. She saw a hero. "Time's up!" President Mick's voice blared, breaking the spell. As the other students began to whisper and point, Izuku's legs finally gave out. He collapsed, his consciousness fading, the last thing he saw being Uraraka's worried face as she rushed to his side. In a darkened monitoring room, a collection of pro-heroes stared at the screen in stunned silence. Did we just see that correctly?" Midnight whispered, her usual flirtatious demeanor completely gone. "His file says his quirk is might, a simple strength enhancement." Cementos rumbled, his placid expression disturbed for the first time in years. "That was not a simple strength enhancement, that was biblical." Mizu, the principal, sat in his chair, his paws steepled, a manic gleam in his beady eyes. "Fascinating! The sheer kinetic energy output is beyond anything we have ever recorded. It defies all known quirk science." Only one person in the room was not surprised. Toshinori Yagi, in his all-might form, stood at the back, his arms crossed. He wasn't shocked. He was deeply, profoundly concerned. He had known the boy had this power, but seeing it unleashed, even in the service of a heroic act, was a sobering reminder of the stakes. He had offered to mentor a boy. He was beginning to realize he was trying to guide a living legend, with all the potential for triumph and tragedy that entailed. A week later, Izuku sat at his dinner table, pushing food around his plate. He hadn't seen All Might since the exam. He was sure he had failed. He had scored a respectable number of villain points, yes, but that final act. He had caused more property damage than every other applicant combined. Yui wasn't looking for a wrecking ball. They were looking for heroes. He had shown them a monster. Inko placed a letter with the Yui seal on the table. It's here, Izuku. His hands trembled as he opened it. A small metal disc fell out onto the table, projecting a hologram. It was All Might. I am here. Yes, a projection, the hero boomed. He gave a brief, standard speech about the written exam before getting to the practical. Young Midoriya, you scored a solid 45 villain points, a fine score on its own. Izuku's heart sank. A fine score wasn't a passing score. But that is not all. All Might continued, grinning. A true hero doesn't just fight villains. They save people. For your selfless, incredible act of saving another examinee, the judges have awarded you 60 rescue points. For a total of 105 points, placing you first in the entire exam. Izuku and Inko both burst into tears. He had done it. He was in. Welcome, young Midoriya, All Might said, his smile softening. This is your hero academia. The projection of All Might flickered and was replaced by a new figure. It was a tired-looking man with long, black hair, weary eyes, and a capture weapon wrapped around his neck. His expression was utterly devoid of enthusiasm. It was Shota Aizawa. His voice was a flat, grim monotone. Midoriya Izuku. You passed. Barely. Izuku's celebratory tears froze on his cheeks. Your rescue points were exemplary, Aizawa stated, his gaze seemingly piercing through the hologram. Your villain points were mediocre. Your potential for catastrophic property damage, however, is the highest in UA's recorded history. That final display was not heroic. It was reckless and uncontrolled. The man leaned closer to the camera, and Izuku felt an instinctual chill run down his spine. Understand this. I don't care about your potential. I care about results and rationality. As it stands, you are a liability walking on two legs. Welcome to you. Don't think for a second this will be easy. One wrong move, and you're out. We don't train catastrophes. The hologram shut off, leaving Izuku sitting in stunned silence in his dimly lit dining room. He had made it into his dream school. He had become a student in the most prestigious hero course in the world. And he was already on thin ice. The weight in his soul felt heavier than ever. The first day at UA High felt like stepping into a dream. The sheer scale of the building, the sunlight glinting off its iconic H-shaped architecture, the buzz of hundreds of hopeful students, it was everything Izuku had obsessed over for years. Yet, a cold knot of anxiety sat heavy in his stomach, a direct result of Aizawa's chilling holographic postscript. We don't train catastrophes. The words were a brand on his consciousness. He found Class 1A, the door comically oversized, and took a deep breath. Control. Precision. Don't break the door. He slid it open with the careful, measured grace he'd learned on Dagoba Beach and stepped inside. The scene was already one of contained chaos. The stern boy with glasses from the exam was chopping his hands through the air, chastising Bakugo for having his feet on the desk. Bakugo, in turn, was telling him in no uncertain terms where he could shove his privileged upbringing. Izuku saw Uraraka, the girl who had saved him from a faceplant and whom he had saved from a giant robot, and a wave of warmth washed over him. At least there was one friendly face. He was so absorbed in the moment that he didn't notice the yellow, caterpillar-like object on the floor behind the teacher's podium until it spoke. If you're here to make friends, you can leave. The entire class froze. A disheveled man with tired, bloodshot eyes slowly unzipped himself from a bright yellow sleeping bag and rose to his feet. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week, and had just lost a fight with a laundry basket. It was Shota Aizawa, his homeroom teacher. It took you 8 seconds to quiet down, Aizawa said, his voice a monotonous drone that somehow commanded more attention than President Mix's loudest scream. That's irrational. Life is short. He pulled a blue gym uniform from his sleeping bag and tossed it onto the podium. Put these on and meet me on the P grounds. No orientation. No welcome ceremony. Just a grim command. The knot in Izuku's stomach tightened. Out on the sun-drenched field, The class buzzed with confusion. A quirk apprehension test? Uraraka asked, her brow furrowed. But what about the entrance ceremony? And the guidance counselor meeting? UA isn't bound by pointless traditions, Aizawa stated, his gaze sweeping over the 20 students. As heroes, you won't have time for them. He turned his gaze, and Izuku felt it land on him like a physical weight. Midoriya. You placed first in the entrance exam, correct? Izuku flinched, all eyes turning to him. Whispers erupted. Him? The plain-looking one? No way, I thought it was the explosion kid. Yes, sir. Izuku squeaked out. What was your best softball throw in junior high? 46 meters, I think, he mumbled. Aizawa tossed him a softball. Try it now. With your quirk. Do whatever you need to, just stay inside the circle. Izuku walked to the white circle painted on the dirt, the ball feeling impossibly fragile in his hand. This was it. His first test. He had to show control. Not power, control. He remembered All Might's words. Teach your hands to listen to your heart. He took a deep breath, focusing the river of power inside him. He wouldn't unleash a flood. Just a single, focused jet. He wound up, his arm a blur of motion, and released the ball. The result was not a quiet thwip. It was a thunderclap. A sonic boom ripped through the air, a visible cone of distorted pressure forming around the point of release. The shockwave kicked up a massive cloud of dust and sent several of his classmates staggering back. The windows of the nearest school building rattled violently in their frames, and 3 of them shattered, the sound of tinkling glass a delayed echo to the initial explosion. Aizawa held up a small device. It beeped, and he showed the screen to the class. It simply read error. The satellite couldn't track it, Aizawa said, his voice dangerously flat. It left the atmosphere. The class erupted in a cacophony of awe and disbelief. Whoa! He threw it into space? What kind of power is that? That's insane! Uraraka looked at him with wide, impressed eyes. Ida, the serious boy, looked analytical. Bakugo, however, was staring at him with a look of pure, unadulterated rage. The same rage he'd shown after the sludge villain incident. It was the fury of someone seeing their entire worldview being torn apart. The useless, clumsy Deku he had tormented his whole life was not just strong. He was in a different league entirely. It was incomprehensible. It was infuriating, but Izuku felt no pride. He felt only a cold, sickening dread. He looked at the shattered windows, at the dust still settling, at the horrified expressions mixing with the awe on his classmates' faces. He hadn't meant to do that. He had tried to hold back, he really had. But the sheer scale of his power was so immense that even a fraction of it was catastrophic. Aizawa's weary eyes narrowed into slits. You think this is a game? He said, his voice dropping, a palpable killing intent washing over the field. The cheerful mood instantly evaporated. You want to be heroes with that kind of attitude? Fine. New rule. Whoever comes in last place in the 8 tests will be judged to have 0 potential, and will be expelled immediately. Panic. Pure, unadulterated panic swept through the class. Izuku felt his blood run cold. Expelled? On the first day? Aizawa's threat from the hologram had been real. This was no longer a test. It was a trial by fire. And Izuku, the boy with infinite power, felt like he was the most likely to get burned. The first event was the 50-meter dash. Izuku watched as his classmates used their quirks in ingenious ways. Ida, with his engine quirk, was a blur. Bakugo propelled himself with explosions. Azuritsu used her frog-like tongue to pull herself forward. When it was Izuku's turn, he stood at the starting line, his heart pounding. How do you run 50 meters with the power to break the sound barrier? He couldn't just run. He would overshoot the finish line by a kilometer, and probably break the sensor. He had to be delicate. The starting pistol fired. Izuku pushed off. He had intended a gentle, controlled burst of power. What he got was the sickening crunch of asphalt spiderwebbing under his feet. He stumbled, catching his balance, his forward momentum jarring and uncontrolled. He covered the distance in 4.13 seconds, impressive for a normal person, but clumsy and slow compared to the top contenders. More importantly, he had left 2 distinct, cratered footprints in the starting block. Aizawa's gaze was like ice. Next, the grip strength test. This should have been his domain. He took the small, handheld device and focused. Gently, he told himself. Just a firm squeeze. He applied pressure, his eyes glued to the digital readout. 100 kilograms. 200 kilograms. 450 kilograms. It was climbing rapidly. He tried to ease off, but there was a lag, an inertia to his own strength. He heard a faint creak from the device's casing. In a panic, he let go completely, but it was too late. The number flashed to 540 kilograms before the device let out a sharp crack and the screen went dead. He had broken it. He handed the busted machine back to Aizawa, his head bowed in shame. Aizawa didn't say a word. He just made a note on his clipboard, his expression unreadable and terrifying. The standing long jump was a similar exercise in humiliation. He tried to perform a simple hop, but his timing was off. He put too much force into the initial crouch, cracking the ground again, and then overcompensated on the jump, sailing clear over the sandpit and landing in a clumsy heap on the grass beyond. The side-to-side steps were a nightmare of coordination. Every time he tried to shift his weight quickly, he felt his own immense power threatening to send him careening out of control. He moved with the stiff, awkward deliberation of a man in a bomb suit, his score pathetically average. With each successive test, his despair grew. He was a god of strength who was failing every test of strength. He saw the looks from his classmates changing from awe to pity, and then to confusion. How could the guy who threw a ball into orbit be so utterly clumsy at everything else? Bakugo watched him, his initial rage curdling into something like contemptuous certainty. See? His sneer seemed to say. I was right. He's a one-trick pony. A monster who can only do one thing, break stuff. He has no skill. No control. No place here. Izuku knew he was in last place. The expulsion threat hung over his head like a guillotine. He was failing. He was proving Aizawa right. He was a catastrophe. The final test was the ball throw again. His chance at redemption, or his final, spectacular failure. He walked back to the circle, his hands trembling. The weight in his soul felt heavier than ever. He remembered his dream of holding up the sky. Right now, he felt like it was crashing down on him. Midoriya! You're up! He took the ball, its familiar weight a mockery. What was he supposed to do? Another sonic boom? Another error on the screen? Aizawa would see it as another failure of control, another mark in the liability column. He had to do something different. He had to show him something. Anything. He took his stance, his mind a whirlwind of doubt. He thought of his mother's worried face. He thought of Bakugo's sneering. He thought of All Might's hopeful smile. He thought of Aizawa's dead eyes. Zero potential. He began to wind up his arm, ready to pour a tiny, minuscule fraction of his power into his fingertip, hoping it would be enough but not too much. And then, nothing. The thrumming river of power inside him, the constant, oppressive weight in his bones vanished. It was gone. He felt light. He felt weak. He felt normal. He staggered, the sudden absence of the internal pressure a shock to his system. He looked up at Aizawa. The teacher's hair was floating, his eyes glowing a menacing red. The capture weapon around his neck writhed like a nest of snakes. I erased your quirk, Aizawa said, his voice a low growl. The entire class stared, mouths agape. That ridiculous entrance exam was completely irrational. A person like you, who can't control their own power, should never have been admitted in the first place. Izuku's blood ran cold. This was it. The final judgment. From what I've seen, Aizawa continued, his red gaze pinning Izuku to the spot. You have one move. You break yourself, cause a massive amount of collateral damage, and then wait for someone else to save you. You intend to become a useless hero once you've crippled yourself in a single, grand gesture? The words were like knives. They were everything Izuku feared about himself, everything he had spent 10 months trying to overcome. He had tried so hard to be careful, but his very nature was too much for this world. He looked down at his hands, at the faint scars from the broken pencil on that awful day in junior high. He thought of the sludge villain, of his reckless, desperate charge. He had been saved by All Might then. He thought of the zero-pointer. He had saved Uraraka, but he had collapsed, useless, afterwards. Aizawa was right. He was a glass cannon. An all-or-nothing gamble. No! Izuku whispered, his voice trembling. That's not what I want. It doesn't matter what you want, Aizawa said, his tone unforgiving. It's what you do. And what you do is break things. Including yourself. He blinked. His hair fell, his eyes returned to normal, and the weight slammed back into Izuku's body with the force of a physical blow. He gasped, his knees buckling for a second. I've returned your quirk, Aizawa said, a challenge in his voice. You have one throw left. Hurry up and get it over with. We're wasting time. He turned his back, a clear dismissal. He had said his piece. He had passed his judgment. Izuku stood in the circle, his mind reeling. He's right. I'm useless. The despair was a suffocating tide. He could just throw the ball normally. Get a mediocre score. Come in last. Get expelled. It would be easier. It would prove Bakugo and Aizawa and everyone who ever called him a monster right. He could go home and give up on a dream that was clearly impossible for someone like him. But then, he remembered All Might. He remembered the 10 months of grueling, painstaking work on that beach. The feeling of finally lifting a television without crushing it. The pride on his mentor's face when the beach was finally clean. All Might hadn't given up on him. How could he give up on himself? Teach your hands to listen to your heart. His heart didn't want to give up. His heart wanted to be a hero. A new resolve, cold and sharp, cut through the fog of his despair. Aizawa thought he was a one-trick pony. A single, explosive move? Fine. He was wrong. He had to prove him wrong. Right here. Right now. He took his stance again. He closed his eyes, shutting out the stares of his classmates. He focused inward, not on the roaring river of power, but on its very source. The weight. The old soul. The legacy. He wasn't just Izuku Midoriya. He was something more. He had the strength of Hercules in his blood, but he also had the mind of Izuku Midoriya, the analyst, the strategist. He couldn't just turn the power off. Aizawa had shown him that. But he didn't have to let it flow through his entire body. He didn't have to let it shatter his own bones. He focused. He pictured the power not as a flood, but as a single drop of water. He visualized every muscle, every bone, every sinew in his right arm. He drew the power, calling it, coaxing it, and channeled it down his shoulder, through his bicep, into his forearm, and concentrated all of it, the entire, catastrophic, sky-breaking force, into the tip of his index finger. It was an agony unlike anything he had ever known. It felt like trying to force a star through the eye of a needle. His entire arm screamed in protest. But he held it. He contained it. He opened his eyes, a fire burning in them. He whipped his arm forward, and at the very last moment, at the perfect apex of the throw, he released the ball and the power simultaneously. The explosion was just as loud. The sonic boom was just as violent. But it was different. It was focused. Directed. A laser beam of force, not a bomb. The ball shot forward like a cannon shell, a white streak against the blue sky, leaving a swirling vortex of air in its wake. But Izuku was still standing. He hadn't been thrown back. His arm was intact. He looked down at his right hand. His index finger was shattered. It was a deep, grotesque purple, swollen and bent at an unnatural angle, the bone clearly broken in multiple places. The pain was excruciating, a white-hot agony that made him want to scream, but he didn't. He clenched his teeth, tears of pain welling in his eyes, and looked up at Aizawa. A fierce, defiant grin stretched across his face. "Mr. Aizawa," he gasped out, his voice hoarse with pain. "I can still move." The field was silent. Every student stared, not at the ball's trajectory, but at Izuku. At his broken finger. At the defiant look in his eyes. He had taken all of that world-breaking power and contained it in a single point, sacrificing a part of himself to control the whole. It was terrifying. It was reckless. It was heroic. Aizawa turned around slowly. His weary face was split by a wide, almost feral grin. It was the most terrifying expression Izuku had ever seen. "You've got potential," he said, the words sending a jolt through Izuku. The device in Aizawa's hand beeped. He held it up. 705.3 meters. A ridiculously high score, but a measurable one. A controlled one. The rest of the class stared in stunned silence. Bakugo's jaw was on the floor, his mind utterly broken by what he had just witnessed. Deku hadn't just used his power. He had commanded it. He had taken a sledgehammer and used it with the precision of a scalpel, even if it meant cutting himself in the process. The sheer willpower required was something Bakugo couldn't even begin to comprehend. He snapped. "Deku!" he roared, explosions bursting from his palms as he launched himself at Izuku. "You bastard! What the hell was that? You've been lying to me all this time!" Before he could get within 10 feet, he was ensnared in Aizawa's capture weapon, his body wrapped tight, his quirks sputtering and dying as Aizawa's eyes flared red again. "Stand down," Aizawa ordered, his voice dripping with menace. "Stop making me use my quirk. I've got dry eye." He released the fuming, powerless Bakugo and turned to the class. "Okay, the demonstration is over. Here are the results." A holographic screen appeared, listing the final rankings. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs as he scanned the list. His name was at the bottom. 20th place. Dead last. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He had done it. He had shown control. He had impressed Aizawa. And he had still failed. He was going to be expelled. The pain in his finger was nothing compared to the cold, crushing despair that washed over him. "By the way," Aizawa said, his back to the class as he began to walk away, "the expulsion threat was a logical deception." Silence. "It was a rational falsehood to push you all to your limits," he called over his shoulder. The entire class, save for a knowing girl with a black ponytail, screamed in unison. "Wait, of course it was a lie," the girl, Momo Yayorozu, said with a sigh. "Didn't you guys realize? It would be completely irrational to expel a student on the first day." Izuku didn't hear them. He was staring at the scoreboard, at his name in last place, and then at his broken finger. A logical deception. He had been pushed to his absolute limit, forced to break himself, to prove himself. And it had worked. As they headed back to the classroom, Aizawa handed him a slip of paper. "Go to the nurse's office. Recovery girl can fix that. But don't get used to it. Find a way to use your power without crippling yourself, Midoriya. This school won't coddle you." In the bright, sterile nurse's office, the elderly hero recovery girl tooted over his finger. "Breaking your bones on the first day! You All Might fanboys are all the same, all flash and no sense," she chided before planting a kiss on his finger. A wave of exhaustion washed over him as his own energy was used to heal the bone, leaving it perfectly whole but leaving him feeling drained and lightheaded. He walked back to the classroom, his mind a whirlwind. He had survived. He hadn't been expelled. But the cost was clear. Aizawa's test hadn't just been about quirks. It had been a test of will, of creativity, of potential. It was a modern-day labor, the first of many he would face. He had passed, but barely. As he slid the door to Class 1A open, he saw Uraraka and Ida waiting for him. "Midoriya! Your finger! Is it okay?" Uraraka asked, her face etched with concern. "I was quite concerned," Ida added, chopping his hand. "Mr. Aizawa may have said it was a logical deception, but he is a teacher who does not hesitate to fail students. Last year he expelled his entire class. You were truly on the brink." Izuku looked at them, at the genuine worry in their eyes. He had spent his entire life being feared or ostracized for his power. But here, on his first day, after his most catastrophic and painful failure, he wasn't being treated like a monster. He was being treated like a classmate. A friend. A small, genuine smile touched his lips. The weight in his soul was still there. The ancient memory still flickered at the edge of his consciousness. The path ahead was terrifying, filled with impossible challenges and the constant threat of his own immense power. But for the first time, he felt like he wouldn't have to walk it alone. The atmosphere in Class 1A had undergone a seismic shift. In the aftermath of Aizawa's brutal quirk apprehension test, Izuku Midoriya was no longer just the quiet, plain-faced boy. He was an enigma, a walking contradiction of catastrophic power and terrifying self-mutilation. He was the kid who could throw a ball into space but broke his own finger doing it. He was the #1 student who had placed dead last. His classmates now looked at him with a mixture of awe, pity, and a healthy dose of apprehensive confusion. He kept to himself, the dull ache in his now-healed finger a constant reminder of the razor's edge he walked. The morning classes, English with present mic, modern hero art history with midnight, passed in a blur. Izuku's mind wasn't on grammar or the evolution of hero costumes. It was on the weight. The oppressive, ancient energy that coiled in his gut felt different. Since the test, it was more responsive, more attuned to his will. The act of forcing it into his fingertip had been like opening a new valve, a dangerous and painful one, but a new pathway nonetheless. He was terrified of what that meant. The afternoon brought the class they had all been waiting for, hero basic training. The anticipation in the room was a palpable, crackling thing. "I am," a familiar, booming voice announced from the doorway. Coming through the door like a normal person, All Might strode into the room, his costume a brilliant beacon of primary colors, his signature smile so wide it seemed to split his face. The class erupted in cheers and gasps of excitement. Izuku felt a familiar surge of starstruck awe, but it was tempered now by the memory of the gaunt, serious man who had trained him on a trash-filled beach. "Welcome to the most important class at UA High," All Might declared, striking a pose. "Here you will learn the basics of being a hero and what it means to fight for justice. And for your first lesson, we're going to jump right into battle training." He gestured to the wall, and numbered cases slid out with a smooth hiss. "And for that, you need these. Your very own hero costumes, designed based on your quirk registration forms and your personal requests." A new wave of excitement rippled through the class as they scrambled to find their cases. Izuku found his, number 17, his hands trembling slightly as he lifted it. It was heavier than he'd expected. In the changing rooms, he unzipped the case. His costume was a simple, full-body jumpsuit of a deep teal green, with white accents and padding on the knees and elbows. A red belt with pouches circled his waist. The most distinct feature was the mask, a metal plate that covered his lower face, with two long, ear-like protrusions that resembled All Might's iconic hairstyle, a fawning, fanbush detail he now found slightly embarrassing. He ran a hand over the material. It was a tough, tear-resistant fabric, but it was also surprisingly thick. He found a small, handwritten note from his mother tucked into one of the gloves. "Dearest Izuku, I know you have to do this, so I added some extra shock-absorbent padding and used reinforced triple stitching on all the seams. Please be careful. Don't break yourself. Or the costume. Love, Mom." His heart ached with a familiar mix of gratitude and guilt. Even his hero costume was a product of his mother's perpetual worry, another reinforcement against his own uncontrollable power. He pulled on the suit. It felt less like armor and more like a cage designed to contain him. When Class 1A emerged into the artificial cityscape of Ground Beta, they were a vibrant, chaotic tableau of burgeoning heroism. Ida's knight-like armor, Uraraka's sleek pink and black spacesuit, Todoroki's stark, half-frozen design, each one was a statement. Then there was Bakugo. His costume was pure aggression, a black sleeveless top, baggy pants, and enormous, grenade-shaped gauntlets that covered his forearms. He looked less like a hero in training and more like a miniature god of war. His crimson eyes scanned the crowd and locked onto Izuku, a sneer twisting his lips. "Looking good, everyone!" All Might boomed, giving them all a thumbs up. "Now, let's get down to business. This will be an indoor, 2-on-2 battle trial. We have villains guarding a nuclear weapon they intend to deploy, and heroes who must infiltrate their stronghold and stop them. The heroes win if they capture the weapon or apprehend both villains. The villains win if they protect the weapon for the time limit, or capture the heroes." He held up a lottery box. "Your partners and opponents will be chosen randomly. Let's see. First up, Team A." He pulled out 2 balls. "Izuku Midoriya." Izuku's heart leaped into his throat. "And Achiko Uraraka." Uraraka beamed at him, giving a little wave. A small measure of relief washed over him. At least his partner was someone kind, someone who didn't look at him like a ticking time bomb. Team A will be the heroes, All Might announced. And they will be facing. He reached into the box again. Team D! Katsuki Bakugo and Tenya Ida! The world seemed to lurch to a halt. The air crackled with a sudden, suffocating tension. Every student on the field felt it. This wasn't a random training exercise anymore. This was a reckoning. Bakugo's sneer widened into a terrifying, predatory grin. His eyes, fixed on Izuku, burned with a furious, triumphant light. Fate had delivered his nemesis directly into his hands. So, what's the plan? Uraraka asked, her voice echoing slightly in the empty stairwell of the target building. They had been given a floor plan and a few minutes to strategize before the trial began. Izuku was barely listening. His mind was a frantic storm of calculations and fear. Bakugo. He had to fight Bakugo. How? How could he possibly fight him without accidentally killing him? A single, misplaced punch, a twitch, a spasm, could turn his childhood friend into a red stain on the wall. The thought was so horrifying it made him physically nauseous. Midoriya? Are you with me? Uraraka asked gently, touching his arm. He flinched back, a conditioned reflex. Sorry! Yes, the plan. He forced himself to focus, to channel his terror into analysis. Okay, Kaken he's incredibly strong. But he's arrogant. He'll almost certainly ignore you and Ida to come straight for me. His first move will be a big, wide-sweeping explosion, probably with his right hand, to test my defenses and intimidate me. Uraraka's eyes widened. You know that for sure? I've been watching him for 10 years. Izuku mumbled, his gaze distant. I know all his moves. That's our advantage. I'll draw Kaken's attention. I'll keep him occupied. While he's focused on me, you use your quirk to slip past and find the weapon. Ida is fast, but he's a defensive fighter in close quarters. You should be able to get past him if you're careful. The goal is a non-combat victory. We win by capturing the objective, not by fighting. The core of his plan was simple: run, avoid, survive. Uraraka nodded, her expression serious. Okay. But what about you? Can you handle Bakugo? No, his mind screamed. I can't handle him because I'm terrified of what I'll do to him. I'll be fine. He lied, his voice barely a whisper. Just be ready. The buzzer sounded, signaling the start of the trial. They entered the building, the heavy metal door closing behind them with an ominous boom. The interior was a maze of concrete corridors and steel pipes, cold and silent. Every footstep echoed. They didn't have to wait long. They were rounding a corner on the second floor when a blur of orange and black exploded out of an intersecting hallway. It was Bakugo, propelling himself with his explosions, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage. Just as Izuku predicted, his right hand was already sparking, primed for a wide-angle blast. DKU! Izuku reacted on pure instinct, shoving Uraraka behind him as he dove to the side. The explosion ripped through the space where they had been standing, a concussive blast of heat and force that scorched the wall black. Run, Uraraka! Go! He yelled, scrambling to his feet. Bakugo ignored her completely as she fled down the hall. His eyes were locked on Izuku. Nice dodge, you worthless pebble! He snarled, smoke curling from his palms. But you can't run forever. I've been waiting for this. A chance to finally beat you to a pulp without the teachers getting in the way. Kaken, we're supposed to be training. Izuku pleaded, backing away slowly. Let's just talk about this. The only talking we're gonna do is when I'm standing over your unconscious body. Bakugo roared, lunging again. What followed was not a fight. It was a desperate, terrifying chase through the labyrinthine building. Izuku used his intimate knowledge of Bakugo's fighting style to stay one step ahead. He knew Bakugo favored his right hook after a short burst propulsion. He knew he tried to use the smoke from his explosions as cover for a close-range attack. Izuku dodged, weaved, and scrambled, his mind working at a furious pace, his costume's reinforced fabric already straining at the seams from his explosive evasions. He wasn't fighting back. He didn't throw a single punch. His entire being was focused on defense, on containment, on ensuring his catastrophic power remained dormant. Bakugo's rage grew with every missed attack. He wasn't just angry, he was personally offended. Deku wasn't treating him like a rival. He was treating him like a fragile piece of glass. "Fight me, you coward!" Bakugo screamed, his explosions becoming more erratic, more destructive, blasting chunks of concrete from the walls. "Stop running around like a scared little rabbit! Where's that power you used on the ball? Where's that monster you've been hiding? Show it to me." He finally cornered Izuku in a large, open-plan office space on the 5th floor, the same floor as the weapon. Rows of empty desks and cubicles provided flimsy cover. "No more running, Deku!" Bakugo panted, a manic glint in his eye. He raised one of his massive gauntlets. "You know what these do? My quirk secretes a nitroglycerin-like sweat, and these gauntlets store it up. I've got a big one saved just for you." In the monitor room, the mood was tense. "Sir, this is too much," a red-haired student named Kirishima exclaimed. "Bakugo's acting like a real villain. He's going to kill him." "He won't," All Might said, his voice tight, his hand gripping the console. "But, young Bakugo, you fool, don't do it," he murmured. Bakugo pulled the pin. The resulting explosion was cataclysmic. It wasn't a blast. It was a focused, building-shaking detonation that blew out every window on the floor and tore a gaping hole in the side of the building. The entire structure groaned in protest. When the smoke cleared, Izuku was on the ground, his costume shredded in places, his body bruised and battered. He had managed to dive behind a concrete support pillar at the last second, which had saved his life. But he was hurt. His ears were ringing, his vision swam, and a sharp pain radiated from his ribs. He pushed himself up, tasting blood. He saw Bakugo stalking towards him through the haze, his expression one of savage disappointment. "How are you still standing?" Bakugo seethed. "You're tougher than you look. But you're still not fighting. Why? You think I'm weak? You think you'll break me if you punch me? Is that it?" He grabbed Izuku by the front of his torn costume and slammed him against the pillar. "Look at me when I'm talking to you. I am not weak. I am going to be the #1 hero. And I don't need your pity, so fight me, you useless monster. Show me that power you're so scared of." He drew back his fist for a final, explosive punch. And in that moment, something inside Izuku Midoriya snapped. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a circuit breaker flipping in his soul. The pain in his ribs, the ringing in his ears, the suffocating fear of his own strength, the burning sting of Bakugo's words, it was all too much. His conscious, terrified mind, the mind of Izuku Midoriya, simply retreated. And something else took its place. The world didn't slow down. It became perfectly, unnaturally clear. The dust motes hanging in the air seemed to freeze. The frantic pounding of his heart slowed to a deep, steady, powerful rhythm, like a war drum. The fear, the panic, the desperation, it all evaporated, replaced by a cold, silent, and absolute calm. It was the same feeling he'd had for a split second against the sludge villain, but now, it was total. His eyes, which had been wide with terror, narrowed. The vibrant green seemed to harden, to deepen, taking on the quality of ancient, unyielding jade. His posture shifted. The boy who was always trying to make himself smaller, who hunched his shoulders and bowed his head, was gone. He stood straight, his center of gravity lowering, his feet planting themselves on the floor with an unshakable solidity. He wasn't a scared child anymore. He was a pillar. Bakugo saw the change. He faltered for a fraction of a second, his punch hesitating. The look in Deku's eyes, it wasn't him. It was something older, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. He threw the punch anyway. Izuku didn't dodge. He didn't block. He moved with an economy of motion that was terrifying to behold. His left hand shot up, not to stop the fist, but to parry it, deflecting the force of the blow harmlessly past his head. At the same time, his right hand snaked out, not in a punch, but with fingers outstretched and rigid. He didn't strike Bakugo's face or chest. He jabbed him precisely in the nerve cluster where his neck met his shoulder. Bakugo's entire right side went numb. A jolt of pure, paralyzing agony shot down his arm, and his explosion sputtered out into a sad little puff of smoke. His eyes widened in shock and pain. Before he could even process what had happened, Izuku's body was already in motion. This wasn't brawling. This wasn't the clumsy, overwhelming force Bakugo knew. This was a martial art. Brutal. Efficient. Ancient. Izuku flowed around him, using Bakugo's own forward momentum to his advantage. He hooked a leg behind Bakugo's knee, destabilizing him. His hand, which had just paralyzed Bakugo's arm, slid up to grip the back of his neck. With a single, fluid motion, he twisted and pulled, not with enough force to break anything, but with perfect leverage, sending Bakugo crashing face first to the floor. What the hell? Bakugo gasped, trying to push himself up, his right arm still useless. In the monitor room, everyone was silent. What was that? Kirishima whispered. Midoriya didn't even use his strength quirk. That's not a modern fighting style. All Might breathed, his eyes wide, his smile completely gone. That's Pancration. An ancient Greek martial art, a brutal combination of boxing and wrestling, favored in their old athletic games. Where in the world did young Midoriya learn that? On the screen, the fight continued. Bakugo scrambled to his feet and came at Izuku with a wild, left-handed explosion. Izuku met the attack head-on. He didn't overpower it. He moved like water, flowing around the blast, his hand shooting through the smoke to grip Bakugo's wrist. He twisted. Bakugo cried out as his wrist was forced to an angle it wasn't meant to go, the bones groaning in protest. Izuku used the arm lock to spin Bakugo around, forcing him into a chokehold. It wasn't a clumsy headlock. It was a perfect, blood-constricting sleeper hold, his forearm pressed firmly against Bakugo's carotid artery. It's over, Kaken, a voice said. It was Izuku's voice, but it was devoid of all its usual trembling uncertainty. It was calm, flat, and final. A brief, dizzying flash seared through Izuku's mind. Not a memory, but an echo. The roar of a massive crowd. The heat of a Mediterranean sun. The taste of blood and dust. The feeling of an opponent's body going limp in his grasp in a sand-filled arena. A referee with a staff raising his other hand in victory. The echo faded. He was back in the building. Bakugo thrashed wildly, his legs kicking, his one good arm flailing uselessly against the unbreakable hold. He was powerless. He, Katsuki Bakugo, was utterly, completely powerless. He wasn't being beaten by a monster. He wasn't being overwhelmed by brute force, which his pride could have possibly stomached. He was being systematically, skillfully dismantled. He was being outfought by Deku. The humiliation was a physical thing, a burning acid in his throat. With a final, desperate roar of defiance, he passed out. Izuku gently lowered his unconscious rival to the floor. He stood up, his breathing deep and even, and tapped the small communication device in his ear. Uraraka. Status report. His voice was still eerily calm. Midoriya! Are you okay? I heard that huge explosion. Her voice crackled back. I'm on the same floor as you. I found the weapon, but Ida is guarding it. He's cleared out the whole room, so I can't use my quirk on anything to distract him. I'm on my way, Izuku said. He took the roll of capture tape from his belt and efficiently bound Bakugo's hands and feet. Villain 1 apprehended. He walked out of the ruined office space, his movements purposeful and smooth. He didn't look back at Bakugo's still form. He found the bomb room 2 corridors down. Ida stood proudly beside the massive prop weapon, his posture perfect. So, you've defeated Bakugo, Ida declared. An impressive feat. However, you shall not get past me. As the villain, it is my sworn duty to protect this weapon. Izuku didn't respond. He just started walking towards him. Your plan is flawed, hero, Ida announced. This room is empty. My comrade was a fool, but I am not. There is nothing for your partner to make float, and your strength is useless against my speed. He was right. It was a perfect defensive setup. But Izuku's mind, or rather, the ancient soul currently at the helm, wasn't thinking about quirks. It was analyzing structure. As Ida braced himself for an attack, Izuku stopped. He looked up at the ceiling. Then he looked down at the floor. He tapped his foot once, then again in a different spot, as if testing the building's integrity. He turned to the support pillar on his left, the one directly below where Ida and the bomb were standing on the floor above. "Eureka," he said into his communicator, his voice still a low monotone. "Hold on to something." He turned to the pillar. He braced himself, sinking into that same impossibly solid stance he'd used against the zero-pointer. He drew back his left arm. And for the first time in the fight he used his power. He didn't unleash a Texas smash. He didn't even throw a full-force punch. He delivered a single, precise, perfectly controlled uppercut to the pillar. It wasn't a destructive blast. It was a focused seismic shock, channeling all the force upwards. Crack! The entire building shuddered. In the bomb room, the floor directly beneath Ida and the weapon exploded upwards. Ida yelled in shock as the concrete shattered, throwing him off balance. The weapon was launched into the air. At that exact moment, Eureka, who had been clinging to the doorframe, slapped her hands together. "Release!" she yelled. She had used her quirk on the thousands of tiny pieces of rubble now flying through the air. A hailstorm of concrete rained down from the ceiling, a perfect distraction. While Ida was still staggering, blinded by dust and pelted by debris, Eureka leaped through the chaos, her movements light and agile. She soared through the air and wrapped her arms around the giant prop weapon. "I've got it!" she yelled. "The hero team! Why-ints!" All Might's voice boomed through the building's speakers. In the corridor below, Izuku looked at the devastation he had wrought with a single, controlled punch. The ancient calm began to recede, like a tide going out. The adrenaline faded. The jade hardness in his eyes softened back into their normal, vibrant green. And then, the exhaustion hit him. It was a force of nature. His mind, which had been a passenger in his own body, came rushing back to the forefront, and the mental whiplash was staggering. The memories of the fight were blurry, like a dream. He remembered Bakugo's taunts, the searing pain of the explosion, and then, fragments. A feeling of cold calm. The oddly familiar sensation of an arm going numb under his touch. The echo of a roaring crowd. The physical toll was just as bad. His body, which had moved with such impossible grace, was now screaming in protest. His ribs ached. His muscles felt like they had been torn to shreds. The mental strain of hosting a battle-hardened ancient soul was, it turned out, immense. His legs gave out. He collapsed against the wall, sliding to the floor, his vision tunneling, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Eureka and Ida running towards him, their faces masks of worry. Izuku woke up to the smell of antiseptic and the gentle beeping of a heart monitor. He was in the nurse's office, a blanket pulled up to his chin. Recovery girl was sitting at her desk, sipping tea. "Ah, you're awake," she said without turning around. "Gave us all quite a scare. Mental exhaustion on top of physical trauma. You pushed yourself far too hard." He tried to sit up, his head throbbing. "Eureka. Ida. Bakugo, are they okay?" "They're fine, dearie. A few scrapes and bruises. Young Bakugo has a particularly nasty pinched nerve in his shoulder and a bruised ego the size of a mountain, but he'll live." She finally turned to look at him, her expression uncharacteristically serious. "Izuku Midoriya. What you did in that trial. All Might is having a very long, very confusing chat with Principal Niza right now." Izuku's heart sank. I messed up, didn't I? I destroyed the building." "You won," she corrected him gently. "And you did it without breaking every bone in your body. That's progress. But that's not what has them concerned." She paused, her gaze sharp. "When they brought you in, you were muttering in your sleep. You kept saying a name. Over and over." Izuku stared at her, a sense of dread coiling in his stomach. He didn't remember muttering anything. "A strange name. Greek, I think," Recovery Girl said, watching him closely. "You kept saying Eurystheus." The name hung in the sterile air of the nurse's office, heavy and strange. Eurystheus. Izuku had never heard it before, yet as Recovery Girl spoke it, a phantom echo resonated deep within him. It was a taste of ash and servitude, the ghost of a bitter oath sworn under a sun he had never seen. He shook his head, a wave of dizziness washing over him. I don't know who that is. He lied, the words feeling clumsy and false on his tongue. He had no memory of a person named Eurystheus, but the name itself felt like a scar on his soul. Recovery Girl watched him for a long moment, her shrewd eyes missing nothing. She sighed, a grandmotherly sound that didn't quite mask her concern. Get some rest, dearie. Your classmates are waiting for you. The walk back to the observation room was a gauntlet of anxious thoughts. The fight was a blur, a collection of visceral feelings rather than clear memories. He remembered the cold calm, the unnatural precision of his own movements, and the terrifying ease with which he had dismantled Bakugo. It wasn't his skill, it was an echo, a muscle memory from a life that wasn't his, and the realization left him feeling like a stranger in his own skin. When he entered the room, all conversation ceased. His classmates stared at him, their expressions a complex tapestry of awe, fear, and utter confusion. Kirishima, the red-haired boy, was the first to break the silence. Dude! Midoriya! That was insane! He exclaimed, his sharp-toothed grin wide. So manly! You didn't even use your super strength until the very end! What was that fighting style? It was awesome, indeed! Ida chimed in, his arm chopping stiffly. A flawless strategic victory, employing both hand-to-hand combat and structural exploitation. Though the collateral damage was significant, Uraraka just gave him a worried, watery smile. I'm so glad you're okay. Izuku could only offer a weak, trembling smile in return. He felt disconnected from their praise, as if they were complimenting a movie character he had played. His gaze drifted to the back of the room where Bakugo stood alone, his arm in a sling, his face a thunderous mask of humiliation and rage. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. There was no understanding in Bakugo's glare, only a deeper, more profound hatred born of utter incomprehension. Izuku had not just beaten him, he had revealed a part of himself that defied every label Bakugo had ever placed on him. He had become an unknown, and Bakugo hated unknowns. All Might debriefed the class, his usual booming enthusiasm conspicuously absent. He praised Uraraka for her quick thinking and Ida for his perfect villainous portrayal. When he got to Izuku and Bakugo, he paused, his expression grim. As for you two, young Bakugo, you let your personal feelings dictate your actions. You were reckless and destructive. That is not the path of a hero. And young Midoriya. All Might's eyes lingered on him, a universe of unspoken questions in their blue depths. While your victory was undeniable, your methods were severe. A hero must always strive to de-escalate, to win with the minimum necessary force. The words were a gentle reprimand, but Izuku felt them like a physical blow. Minimum necessary force. He had used it, hadn't he? He hadn't broken any of Bakugo's bones. He hadn't leveled the building, but the cold, efficient way he had dispatched him felt more brutal than any simple punch. The rest of the day passed in a haze. The final bell was a mercy. Izuku packed his bag, eager to escape the lingering stares and whispers, when All Might appeared at the classroom door, now in his skeletal form. Young Midoriya. A word. They walked in silence to a secluded faculty lounge. The quiet was heavy, punctuated only by Tashinori's occasional racking cough. That martial art, Tashinori began, sinking wearily into an armchair. Pancration. I had to look it up to be sure. A combat sport from ancient Greece, extinct for over 1500 years. Where did you learn it? Izuku stared at the floor. I don't know, he whispered, the truth feeling like a flimsy excuse even to his own ears. I was scared. Bakugo was trying to hurt me. And then it just happened. My body moved on its own. Tashinori was silent for a long time, his bony fingers steepled under his chin. Your quirk registration lists your power as might. A simple, if potent, strength enhancer. But what I have witnessed goes far beyond that. The raw power that dwarfs my own. The instinctual combat knowledge of a dead civilization. The names of ancient kings whispered in your sleep. This is not just a quirk, my boy. It is something more. Something older. Izuku finally looked up, his eyes pleading. What's happening to me, All Might? I don't know, Tashinori admitted, his voice grave. But we will figure it out together. For now, focus on your training. Focus on learning to be Izuku Midoriya, the hero. The rest, we will face as it comes. The conversation, while unsettling, was a small comfort. He wasn't alone in this. But as he walked home, the setting sun casting long, distorted shadows, he couldn't shake the feeling of being an imposter. Who was he? The crying, analytical hero fanboy? Or the cold, calculating warrior who had emerged in the heat of battle? The next day, the press swarmed the gates of UA, hungry for a story about All Might's new teaching position. To get the students through the throng, Aizawa announced a surprise class trip. Today, he said, his voice as tired as ever, we'll be conducting a special rescue training exercise. You can wear your costumes. Meet at the buses in 10 minutes. The destination was a massive, dome-shaped facility on the outskirts of campus, the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, or USJ. Inside, the space was breathtaking. It was a cavernous arena containing perfect replicas of various disaster zones, a landslide area, a burning cityscape, a shipwreck in a maelstrom, and more. Waiting for them was the space hero, 13, their form bulky and concealed within a puffy white suit. Welcome, everyone! 13 announced, their voice filtered through their helmet. This is the USJ. A facility I designed to train you in all manner of rescue scenarios. As 13 began to explain the dangers of their own quirk, black hole, and the importance of using their powers to save rather than to harm, Izuku felt a strange prickle on the back of his neck, a sense of unease. He scanned the massive facility, his eyes lingering on the central plaza below. It happened in an instant. The lights in the dome flickered and died, plunging them into emergency lighting. The water in the central fountain sputtered and warped, and then, a swirling vortex of dark purple mist opened in the middle of the plaza. It looked like a special effect, part of the training. But the figure that stepped out was no hero. He was a lanky man covered in dismembered hands, one of which obscured his face. His posture was a twisted caricature of apathy, and he scratched at his neck with a frantic, scraping sound. Behind him, dozens, then hundreds, of others began to pour out of the portal. They were a motley collection of thugs and villains, their faces contorted in ugly sneers and hungry grins. Stay together and don't move! Aizawa barked, his usual apathy instantly replaced by a razor-sharp focus. He pulled his yellow goggles over his eyes. 13, protect the students! Those are real villains! A second villain emerged from the portal, a creature made of the same purple mist, with glowing yellow eyes. The symbol of peace is not here. The mist villain, Kurojiri, rasped. According to the schedule we procured, he was supposed to be. Perhaps he will show up if we kill a few of his students. As Aizawa leaped down the massive stone staircase to engage the horde below, a cold, primal dread seized Izuku. He wasn't just scared. It was something deeper, a feeling that resonated with the ancient weight in his soul. His eyes were drawn to a third figure that lumbered out of the portal, a creature that made the other villains look like playground bullies. It was a behemoth, a mountain of dark purple muscle, easily twice the size of All Might. Its skin was scarred and tough, its movements unnervingly bird-like. But its most horrifying feature was its head. Its brain was exposed, a grotesque, pulsating mass nestled in its skull, and its eyes were fixed and unblinking. Its mouth was a permanent beak-like grimace. When Izuku saw it, a memory, sharp and visceral, slammed into him. Not a dream this time, but a lucid, waking flash. He stood in a swamp, the air thick with the stench of decay. Before him rose a creature of nightmare, a serpentine monster with 9 heads, each one hissing and spitting black venom. The Linean Hydra. He remembered the feel of his club crushing one of its heads, only to watch in horror as 2 more grew in its place. He remembered the searing heat of the torch as he cauterized the stumps, the monstrous shrieks of the beast, the desperate, unending nature of the battle. The creature below this, Nomu, as the hand villain called it, triggered that memory with paralyzing force. The exposed brain, the unnatural form, the sheer sense of an unkillable, man-made abomination. It was the Hydra reborn in the modern age. He was so lost in the terrifying vision that he didn't react when Kurojiri appeared before them, a wall of purple mist blocking their escape. I will not allow you to leave, the villain declared. My role is to scatter you and torture you to death. Bakugo and Kirishima leaped forward, their attacks passing harmlessly through the villain's gaseous form. In the next instant, the world became a swirling vortex of purple and black. Izuku felt a sensation of falling, of being pulled apart and reassembled. He landed with a splash in cold water. He was in the shipwreck zone. The sky above was the artificial gray of the domed ceiling, and he was surrounded by villains with aquatic quirks. He wasn't alone. Ajiri, Tsuyu and a small, purple-haired boy named Mineta were with him. Midoriya! Tsuyu said, her calm demeanor a welcome anchor in the chaos. Ribbit! This is bad. The villains closed in, their grins wide and predatory. Look what we've got! A couple of Yue brats! The boss'll be pleased. Izuku's mind was still reeling from the vision of the Hydra, but the immediate threat snapped him back to the present. He looked at Tsuyu and Mineta. They were his classmates. He had to protect them. Okay, he said, his voice surprisingly steady. The cold calm from his fight with Bakugo was beginning to seep into his veins again. Tsuyu, you can get us back to the boat. Mineta, your quirk, those sticky balls, can you detach them at will? Working together, they formulated a plan. As the villains closed in, Izuku took a deep breath. He didn't try to punch the water. That would be useless, a foolish waste of energy. Instead, he flicked his finger with a tiny, contained burst of power, the same technique he'd used in the ball throw. Delaware Smash. The resulting shockwave was not a tidal wave, but a concussive underwater blast. It created a massive whirlpool, sucking the villains and the water towards a central point. As they were pulled together, Mineta frantically threw his purple spheres, which stuck to the villains, binding them into a single, flailing clump. Tsuyu then used her long tongue to grab Izuku and Mineta, pulling them from the vortex and back to the edge of the central plaza. They regrouped just in time to witness a horrifying scene. Aizawa was a whirlwind of motion, fighting dozens of villains at once with his capture weapon and quirk-erasing stare. But he was only one man. The hand villain, Tamura Shigaraki, rushed him. Aizawa dodged, landing a solid elbow strike to the villain's gut, but Shigaraki managed to grab his elbow with his 5 fingers. A sickening grinding sound filled the air as Aizawa's elbow disintegrated into dust. Their teacher cried out in pain, and in that moment of distraction, the Nomu was on him. The behemoth moved with impossible speed. It slammed Aizawa into the ground, the sound of cracking bone echoing through the plaza. It broke his other arm, then began to systematically smash his head into the concrete, over and over again. Izuku froze. The sight of his teacher being so brutally broken, the rhythmic, sickening thump, 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 of his head hitting the pavement, unlocked something deep inside him. The cold calm was consumed by a hot, divine rage. It was the rage of the demigod from his dreams, a righteous, terrible fury against the unnatural and the monstrous. His vision tunneled. The cackling of the other villains, the terrified gasps of his classmates, the distant sounds of battle, it all faded away. All he could see was the Nomu, the modern-day Hydra, and the broken body of his teacher. His eyes, for a brief, terrifying moment, seemed to glow with an inner golden light. Shigaraki looked up, his one visible eye widening behind the hand on his face. He saw the green-haired boy standing at the edge of the plaza, and he felt it. A pressure. A presence. The boy's quirk, it felt different from the others. It wasn't loud and flashy like Bakugo's, or versatile like Todoroki's. It was heavy. Ancient. It felt like a mountain had just gained sentience, and was glaring at him. Nomu! Shigaraki rasped, scratching his neck. Kill the children! The Nomu stopped its brutal assault on Aizawa and turned. It fixed its blank, unblinking eyes on Izuku, Tsuyu, and Mineta. Run! Izuku screamed, his voice raw. But before they could move, the monster was there. It didn't run, it simply appeared before them, its speed defying its bulk. Its massive, clawed hand descended, aimed directly at Tsuyu's head. There was no time for a plan. No time for a focused Delaware smash. There was only instinct. The ancient warrior's soul took complete control. Izuku moved, a blur of green. He pushed Tsuyu out of the way and met the Noma's descending arm with his own. The impact was titanic. A shockwave erupted from the point of contact, cracking the ground in a perfect circle around them. Izuku's feet sank into the concrete, but he held his ground. He had caught the Nomu's punch. The Nomu, a creature bioengineered to trade blows with All Might, tilted its head, a flicker of what might have been confusion in its dead eyes. It had been stopped. What? Shigaraki screeched, his scratching becoming frantic. How? Nomu's strength is on par with All Might. No one should be able to stop him. Izuku gritted his teeth, the bones in his arm groaning under the strain. The Nomu was impossibly strong, but the memory of holding up the heavens was a fresh, burning scar on his soul. This weight was familiar, manageable. He roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury, and shoved the Nomu back. The behemoth staggered, taking a single step backward. It was an impossible feat. It has shock absorption, not nullification. Izuku growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that didn't sound like his own. The words came to him unbidden, a tactical analysis born of ancient battle sense. He didn't know how he knew, he just knew. There's a limit. He didn't give the Nomu time to recover. He moved, his body flowing with the brutal grace of Pancration. He didn't try to punch its chest or head. That would be a waste of energy against its shock-absorbing flesh. He remembered the Hydra. Brute force was not enough. He had to be smarter. He targeted the joints. He slammed his elbow into the Nomu's knee, not to break it, but to hyperextend it, throwing the creature off balance. He ducked under a wild swing and drove the heel of his palm upwards into the monster's exposed armpit, a vulnerable point on any brawler. The Nomu grunted, a flicker of pain crossing its face. Shigaraki watched, his scratching stopping, his body trembling with a mixture of rage and fascination. His quirk, it's not just strength, he whispered to Kurojiri. It's something else. It feels old. Izuku was a whirlwind of controlled violence. He was landing dozens of blows for every one of the Nomas, each one aimed at a nerve cluster, a joint, or a weak point. He couldn't seriously injure the monster, but he was holding his own. He was surviving. He was keeping the artificial god of destruction from harming his friends, but it was taking a toll. His body was screaming. He was not invincible like the demigod of his dreams. He was a mortal vessel containing a divine fire, and the vessel was beginning to crack. His arms were bruised and bloody. He could feel a rib splinter from a glancing blow. The Nomu, frustrated, unleashed a wild, two-handed clap, trying to crush him between its massive palms. Izuku, seeing the attack coming, did the only thing he could. He dropped to the ground and drove a powerful kick upwards into the Nomu's exposed brain. The monster shrieked, a high-pitched, unnatural sound, and staggered back, clutching its head. For the first time, it seemed genuinely hurt. You cheating brat! Shigaraki howled in fury. NOMU! Kill him! Destroy him! The Nomu's eyes regained their focus, and they now burned with a mindless rage. It charged, no longer holding back, its fists a blur of purple destruction. Izuku braced himself for the final, desperate struggle. He knew he couldn't win. He could only buy time, and then, the entrance doors to the USJ were blown off their hinges. Have no fear, students! A voice boomed, a sound that cut through the chaos like a thunderclap. Because I am here! All Might stood at the top of the stairs, and he was not smiling. His face was a mask of cold, righteous fury. He saw the broken form of Aizawa. He saw his terrified students, and he saw young Midoriya, battered and bloody, standing alone against a monster designed to kill him. He was on the plaza in an instant, a golden blur. He scooped up Aizawa's body and moved Izuku, Tsuyu, and Mineta to safety in less than a second. Thank you, young Midoriya, he said, his voice low and tight with rage. You did well. Now let me take it from here. The battle that followed was the stuff of legends. All Might and the Nomu traded blows that shook the entire dome, their punches creating tornadoes of air pressure. It was a clash of gods, but Shigaraki was confident. It's no use, All Might. My Nomu has shock absorption. It can withstand your 100% smashes, and he was right. All Might was landing blow after blow, but the Nomu was just soaking up the damage. It managed to get its claws into All Might's old injury, drawing blood and making the hero cry out in pain. From the sidelines, Izuku watched, his mind racing. He had felt it. The Noma's shock absorption had a limit. You just had to hit it faster than it could process, and redistribute the force. All Might! He yelled, his voice hoarse. He's not immune! You have to hit him faster! Overload him! All Might heard him. He looked at the boy, saw the analytical fire in his eyes, and understood. He grinned, a bloody, defiant expression. A good hero always listens to advice. You're right, young Midoriya. If I can't do it in one punch, I'll just have to hit him with hundreds. He braced himself, steam beginning to pour off his body. I have to go beyond. Plus Ultra! What followed was not a punch. It was a storm. A hurricane of fists, each one landing with the force of a cannon shell, too fast for the Nomu to absorb. 100 punches. 200. 300. The Nomu's body began to break down, unable to handle the sheer, overwhelming kinetic energy. With a final, cataclysmic blow that sent the Nomus sailing out of the dome and into the sky, All Might stood victorious, one fist raised in triumph. The remaining villains, their trump card defeated, were swiftly dealt with as the other UA teachers arrived. Shigaraki and Kurojiri, however, managed to escape, but not before Shigaraki took several bullets from Snipe. In the aftermath, as the students were being cared for by paramedics, All Might, his form flickering as his time limit ran out, pulled Izuku aside. He looked at the boy's battered body, at the fierce, ancient light that still lingered in his eyes. Young Midoriya, he said, his voice quiet and heavy. We need to talk about what your quirk really is. Izuku met his mentor's gaze, the weight of 1,000 unanswered questions pressing down on him. He had faced the Hydra's jaws and survived, but he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was only the beginning. The monsters of this new world were real, and the ancient soul within him was stirring, awake and hungry for battle.